Thank you for attending the August 27th, 2021 Audit Committee meeting. I'd like to start off by standing and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, for liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much. In terms of attendance, I'm here, Dan Woodhouse is here, Jatika is not here virtually. She moved out of Cincinnati. I don't think she's connecting with us. Okay. Jennifer Kalzer is supposed to be with us virtually. I can't tell who's here virtually.
I'm here.
Jennifer is here.
Hi.
Okay. Virtually. Okay. Jim Crossett is not here. Christine is here. David Foote is here virtually. David, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Okay. Elizabeth Guttridge is here. Carol Mitchell Lawrence is not here. Reese Warner is here. Eve Bolton is here, but she's on another meeting at the present time. Melanie Bates is in attendance. Ryan Messer is not here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 6 audit committee members. We need 7 for a quorum. So I guess technically we can't take a vote. Do we have 7? Oh, you're okay. We're good. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. We have a lot to go over tonight. We have an expanded staff with the addition of Emma Williams, and I think Lauren's going to introduce her later on. And we've just taken on a lot more responsibilities. This ESSER funding project is new. We have some requests from the Cincinnati Board of Education for some specific requests from them, which Lauren's going to go over later on. In terms of people join the audit committee for 3-year periods, the term of myself and David Foote expires 12/31/21 this December. David Foote has indicated that he would like to re-up for another 3 years. In order to coincide the chairman position, which is myself, and vice chairman Dan, with membership on the committee, we've recommended a change, and that being that my term will expire at the end of next year. I will agree to serve as chairman for 1 more year, subject to approval at the December meeting. Dan's position as vice chairman runs through next year anyway. So at that so January 1st of 2023 will be electing a new chairman and a new vice chairman for the audit committee. Jatika Britton has moved out of town, whereas she would like to remain on the audit committee. Because we need a quorum of 7, I think we should try to find a replacement for her locally that can attend the meetings in person. And I'm willing to, does anybody have any comments on that? There's a process for adding audit committee members. Christine?
Is there anything that requires residency? If not, I think that probably should be an addition for us to think about, or just make it known that it has to be attendance in-person meetings, some expectation there.
Are you talking residency in the city of Cincinnati specifically, or greater Cincinnati?
I mean, I think we should consider whether, I would think at least the region, but we should consider whether they should be within the Cincinnati Public Schools district.
I agree.
To live, a taxpayer.
Okay, so that's not in the charter right now, Lauren, is that correct? There's no residency requirement?
That's correct. Currently, if we look at the attached charter that's in your packet, there is not a requirement to live locally. And actually, if you look under meetings, I added a comment where we say we request or require rather each member attend the meeting either in person or via teleconference. And now due to legislation requiring us to have folks in person for it to count towards a quorum, I recommend perhaps we strike the language of teleconference, which would then imply the person on the committee would need to be able to be in the vicinity to attend in person.
Okay.
So we could take that further then and add a district residential requirement, but perhaps that would be an expansion on what I suggested.
Okay, so do I have a motion to require that the audit committee members reside in the greater, I guess in the Cincinnati Public School District? Do I have a motion to that effect from somebody, one of the audit committee members?
Sure, I'll make that motion.
Okay, I will second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, so that'll be a requirement. Does anybody have any comments on whether or not we have 10 audit committee members now that are not on the Board of Education. We'll be down to 9 since Chatika is leaving. Does anybody have any thoughts on whether or not we want to add a 10th member to the audit committee? Dan?
I think we should hold our standard application process, and I don't think we're obligated to add a 10th. If we get no good candidates, then we don't add one if we don't feel like it. If we find a good candidate, I think we should consider them and get to 10 again if we feel it's the right fit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think in your packet, there's a procedure for accepting new candidates. I guess that opens on December 1st. Is that correct? But there's no reason why we shouldn't try to find somebody now. So do we post this, or do we put it on the school website, or how does this physically work?
Yes, essentially, if you take a look at this timeline that we put together, this will follow the same process we developed a handful of years ago. So our public relations office will issue a statement and an application explanation for the public to respond to. We'll then collect the applications, and the window for applications will close December 1st, leaving December 2nd essentially through the 13th up until the date of our next audit committee meeting on the 14th for our chair and vice chair to interview prospective candidates. And then at the December meeting, if we could bring forth a candidate or two for possible recommendation and consideration of the committee, we can then move forward with a resolution, and they would go through the finance, ultimately up to board, and attend after their approval, attend the first meeting of the year in 2022, which would be the February meeting.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. I don't think we need a motion since it's already in the member appointment timeline. So let's plan on doing that. Okay. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the benefits audit people. I guess Susan Bunt. Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple of quick edits to the edits. If you'll entertain that.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Okay, on page 2, it says under audit committee chairs, second line, the audit committee chair will be selected through a majority vote of all audit committee members. I would think that it would be more practical to say a quorum of audit committee members during an audit committee meeting, because we don't often have all the members at one meeting. So
absolutely.
I would recommend that. And then under meetings, where it says it is expected that audit committee members attend all meetings, and then, if any member misses 2 meetings, their membership will be discussed. Since that's not always practical, people like Ryan's flying today, we have a couple of people attending virtually because of their situations. Can we say something like attend all meetings in person if at all possible, and virtually as an alternative, or something to that effect?
Problem is, Melanie, we need a quorum. Because if people aren't here in person,
right,
we need 7 people. And I know I'm not necessarily saying that they are going to be dismissed from the audit committee, that we're going to discuss it.
Okay.
Okay, and see if they're the reason they're not there is reasonable. I mean, I get the sense that people want to serve on this committee. I mean, I don't know how it's been in the past, but I think people want to serve on our audit committee, so I think there's no shortage of candidates that would like to be on the committee. And if someone joins the audit committee but doesn't bother showing up for meetings, then I think we should replace them with someone, or consider replacing them with someone that might be a little more enthusiastic about it. Those were the words. That was.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, but there could be, somebody could be in quarantine 1 month and traveling the next month, and
So do you want to make an exception for Cincinnati Public School Board members?
no, not really. I mean, that would be for any member of the committee, I would think, because we all have equal voting rights and responsibilities. So I don't think that would make a difference. But if any member misses 2 consecutive meetings without advance notice, if people are just missing, that's one thing. If somebody misses because they're ill or for whatever reason, and they notify the body, that's
Well, that's what I'm saying. We'll discuss it. Okay, I'm not saying they're necessarily dismissed, but
okay.
I just want to put the members on notice that they're expected to show up.
Okay,
That's all.
I can live with that.
So how do we work this, Lauren? We have the audit committee charter here. There's some red line changes to it. The biggest one being the change from the finance committee to the budget, finance and growth committee, and a few other things. Do we want the audit committee to review these changes and vote on it at the December meeting?
That would be my recommendation, and we can also embed language around the requirement that you all just passed the motion on about the members residing within the district. So I'll make that change and then send this back out to folks to review, and then hopefully we can pass
Formally
this
vote on
through
it in December.
Does that sound okay?
Fine,
Okay, perfect. And then to summarize our decisions on membership, the voting will take place, or the formal motion for David and Tim's 3-year reappointment at the December meeting as a 1-year extension of Tim's audit committee chair. And then between now and December 1st, we'll issue the public notice for applications and then follow the process as described for the new member. And then Tim and Dan as chair and vice chair will notify Chatica of the impact to her membership due to residing outside of the city.
Okay, so any
Did I
other
get that
questions?
correct?
Any other questions about the member appointment timeline or the audit committee charter as amended?
So the notice will go out, the application deadline will be December 1st, or it will go out, the notice will go out by December 1st.
Yep, so we'll get the notice out as soon as possible.
Okay.
So we'll probably allow due time to notify Ms. Britton, and then once that has been taken care of, we'll have public affairs issue with a due date of December 1st.
Okay, and can you just maybe let us know when it goes out? So
Yep.
if we want to send it out to anybody or.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll
Forward
make
it
sure
on.
everyone gets a copy and is copied on the
Okay.
public notice as well.
Perfect.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, no other questions? Then I'll turn it over to the Susan Bunty and the benefits audit recommendations update.
Good afternoon. So it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon with Dr. Ross Turpo, our Director of Talent Acquisition and Staffing. And also joining us virtually is Christy Clements from BKD. She's going to share and update our progress in our CPS benefits work, particularly paying attention to data verification, validation, and operational effectiveness.
Great, thank you. So I hope I'm sharing my screen appropriately. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Great, thank you. So we have a great deal of information to cover and to get through 10 minutes, so I'm just going to jump right in. The first item that I want to cover are just to provide you some updates to our project management process and our project team. Joining me today, along with Chris, is Kendra Roberts. I'd like to introduce you to her. She is a managing consultant in our Nashville office. We are adding her to the team as we start to move into the validation and verification efforts. We wanted to add another member of the team to really to assist with the overall project management. Chris is really embedded in with the project team day to day, really focused on assisting and providing that guidance. So Kendra will be assisting him, but also just adding support to from a project management perspective. Additionally, one other update, we received feedback last week, and so we will be revamping our project management weekly updates to provide more detail and clarity. We currently send this email out on a weekly basis, and we received some really good feedback from the stakeholders around their requirements and what they would like to see. So look for this revamping to occur over the next week. Next, we're going to move on into the detailed update related to Phase 2 and our approach. So I first wanted to provide a quick refresher on Phase 2. As BKD is working with management, we're really focused on 3 areas in the ongoing assessment. So technology, people, and processes. And I tend to think of these like a 3-legged stool, that if one of the 3 is not really meeting expectations or effective, then the process or the stool will be somewhat unstable or wobbly. And so keep that in mind as we're going through this assessment, that that's the lens that we're really have applied to these remediation efforts in the 3 areas of focus. So in Phase 2, we really have 4 objectives I want to cover today that we had said we would meet as part of this Phase 2. The first one is really just to provide those updates at regular intervals to management and the audit committee. And then also we plan to issue a formal report at the closing of this engagement. So to update you on that first item, we are holding numerous project meetings. Those are held weekly with the project team. And really, we are working to continue to define or refine actions of remediation as management works through their planned remediation efforts. We're asking questions. We're talking about different scenarios, risk mitigation, etc. So we're helping them further refine those activities. And then we're really focused on also new items that come up throughout our discussions at different points in time. And we'll cover those in a bit. We also issue those weekly emails on a project status and updates, which also highlight any challenges that we face, any pressures to the timeline, etc. Again, we will be redesigning those or revamping those over the next week. Starting the week of November 1st, we will start holding weekly meetings with the executive team. This is critical because we're moving into really that verification and validation piece of the project. And so it's really important to hold those meetings so that we have the timely communication. If there is something that needs to be addressed, those discussions will just be held in a timely manner until everyone's on the same page. So we will also, during those meetings, discuss any potential recommendations or findings or outcomes that we are starting to see materialize that we think will be included in our report at the end of our engagement in December. We just really no surprises and want to make sure that everyone's on board and aware of what some of the considerations are. So the second piece of our project approach in Phase 2 is really addressing those findings that were in the 2020 internal audit report. So while we were doing that, we've also looked for opportunities where some of these items could be automated or controlled in a different manner. So to provide some perspective, we identified 16 items that were contained in that internal audit report. So we are actively working those items, assisting management in determining the best course of action for remediation, what evidence needs to be maintained so that we can conduct our validation and verification efforts. But during our work around those 16 items, BKD also identified 14 other potential improvements related to increasing automation, process efficiency opportunities, as well as maybe just improvements to existing controls. So while we're working on those 16 items, At the same time, we are also working on those 14 other items to really determine feasibility, et cetera. So we are really managing a total of 30 items that we're assisting management with in the remediation activities. These are the 16 items that were identified in the internal audit report. These are not the 14 items that I mentioned BKD noted. We'll cover those in a minute. But you'll see that we are tracking the status of each of these items. I'm going to go into our verification and validation procedures and process, but we have two types of validation, test of design and test of operational effectiveness. But you'll see that we are tracking dates, we are tracking our results of verification, we're also tracking the type of control and control frequency. And why is this important? So you'll see here on this slide that there are two types of validation efforts that we plan to perform, and these are very common. They're common to internal audit, they're just common to audit in general. The first is a test of design. And this is a validation that a particular control has been established and put in place as stated by management. It's a point in time. So as management works through the remediation efforts, they notify us that they think that control has been implemented and put in place, and that the risks that that control is designed to mitigate, that it will adequately mitigate it.
Christy?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of items to go through here, okay? The only question I have is there going to be a deliverable? Are you going to provide a report or checklist or something?
Yes. So at the end of this, there will be a...
And when can we expect a report or a deliverable?
That comes at the end of the project, which is at December.
When's the end of the project?
So we could have that report in time for the next audit committee meeting, which is, I think, mid-December, towards the end of December.
Okay, this has been going on for many months now. And to the best of my knowledge, we haven't received anything. And this is, you're sort of giving the presentation you gave at the last audit committee meeting. So I've got to move on to the next agenda item. Does anybody have any questions for Christy before we move on? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, audit committee and internal audit strategy discussion. Lauren and Jeff Reese from Guidehouse.
How about now? Much better. Wonderful. All right, we'll go ahead and get moving. We're going to move rather expeditiously. So I will go ahead and once Rob starts the slide, we can jump right over to slide number 2, please. So I'd like to introduce you all to Jeff Reese, who is our co-sourcing partner through Guidehouse. I'll turn it over to him for a brief introduction and a bit about himself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Jeff Reese here. Real quickly with it want to keep this as brief as possible. So pleasure to be here. Glad to meet everybody. For everybody that doesn't know Guidehouse, former Big Four spinoff for state and local governments. We do a lot with local municipalities as well as education. A little bit about myself. I'm not only an internal auditor and a consultant. I've also been a chief audit executive. I've also been on the operational side of things. I've been receiving end of some of the audits as well, so I try to take a practical approach, as well as a lot of data and analysis in my career. So, pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful. So a bit about today's conversation. So over, the last handful of meetings, we've received some feedback from the audit committee about furthering our educational, but also engagement aspects of this group. And so today we're going to continue that journey of providing that information. So at our last meeting, you might recall Kevin Vaughn joined us from Plattenberg and gave us a bit more information about what our external auditors cover. So as we think through as the internal audit group and as our audit committee partner, what role do we each play in this partnership? So today we'll cover a bit of information about internal audit. Some of the information may be redundant to our members who have been with us longer, but we wanted to take that mindful effort of educating folks who are newer. And then further, we'll move into a conversation about audit committee and how we all work together through our governance structure. Finally, our goal here is to think through, we are here now in October of 2021 with the goal of having a strong, robust plan come fiscal year 2023. So we're going to talk about our plan between now and essentially this upcoming June. So while this next slide is rather simple, it is the true mission of internal audit. We're actually quoting directly from the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is the governing body of the profession. We wanted to also take a moment to acknowledge how this fits into our internal audit structure. So we've included in our plan the past few years the development of our internal audit manual as well as a quality assurance improvement program. And so we wanted to remind the group that we are now finalizing as we work through this year's plan, that manual and that quality assurance program. So what the outcome of that will be is a document that not only we'll utilize in our day-to-day work, but also something we can provide to you as a committee to say, okay, here's how internal audit views their daily processes and the types of work that they perform. So I think as we've solidified these aspects, we'll all be able to see things kind of from the same perspective and on the same page. So very briefly, this is probably terms that we're very familiar with at this point. So as a reminder, internal audit has categorized our services into four categories. So advisory work is the work that we do in a more consulting manner. At the end of the day, the biggest differentiator between advisory and assurance work is that advisory is management-led and it doesn't result in a formal audit report like our assurance projects do. So assurance is what we think of in terms of our bread and butter audits. It's the audit report where we come in and do a more robust assessment, as you can see through the different categories below assurance. And then finally, follow up are when we come back and reperform audits we've done in the past. So again, to further drive, put some perspective as to the way our work progresses throughout the year, you can see this graphic here on the screen that takes us through an annual audit cycle. So Rob, if you don't mind pressing the button once more, you'll see the highlighted section, and that's where we currently are today. So this conversation is to show where we are focused at the moment as an internal audit group, as well as our partnership through the audit committee, but also where we're looking ahead between now and June of 2022 as we create next year's plan. And so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jeff. I wanted him to speak to these slides in this conversation. This really is going to adapt into a two-way dialogue as we get towards the end of our slides. I wanted Jeff to bring some experience as to best practices, what he's seen in his own world, as well as through his clients.
As Lauren just made mention, so as we're going through any of this, it is definitely a dialogue. So if there's any questions or if I go over something too quickly, please just stop me and just ask away. So in front of you is a quick diagram of some of the risk and compliance frameworks that I've used over the years. There's a couple different maturity models that are out there, with the IAA kind of pulling it in, but this one kind of lays it out in a very logical flow in terms of first, second, and third layers that are out there. So as you kind of look at this, you'll notice the arrows going back and forth between all the three layers of defense. So starting with the third line in the board of directors and the audit committee, setting that risk appetite for, how much risk their own organization is willing to accept in terms of, the amount of money they're willing to spend, give management the ability to exercise their own actions on a day-to-day basis. And then that kind of flows back to the executive line of management, and then the day-to-day line of the control owners and what's taking place at that first level. And then ultimately everybody's accountable up that chain, then back up to the board of directors and the audit committee that are out there. And you'll notice at the third line, you've got the independence perspective of working with the audit committee is Lauren, the internal audit group, and some of the co-sourcing avenues that are available to make sure like that any of the risks that you guys have concerns over, that they are out there looking at those, monitoring them, and giving you guys the feedback and the comfort that is there. So making sure that there's that two-way dialogue that is taking place both between internal audit and the audit committee and whatnot. So, all right.
Is there going to be a deliverable of any kind?
What's that?
Is there going to be a deliverable of any kind, a report or anything like that that you're going to issue?
Yeah, well, what we're going to do is work with Lauren to assist with a couple things of co-sourcing on one of the audits. So we'll be delivering a report there, as well as helping with the audit manual updates and whatnot. So there'll be deliverables as we go along.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody have any questions for Jeff or Lauren on this segment? Okay.
We got 2 more slides and we'll
Okay, go ahead,
speed on
Lauren.
through. Keep it moving.
So yeah, so this one will be fairly quick. So kind of expanding on that risk appetite that we just discussed before, you kind of got the accountability at the governance level, the audit committee level, the assurance, which is the internal audit level for everybody here, and then the actions day-to-day management items that are taking place in order to make sure the operations are running. And then where there's those overlaps, everybody's having an interaction between each of the various phases as that they are taking place. So kind of keeping it as short as possible for you. So I'll turn it over to Lauren to kind of give more of a CPS perspective for you.
Right, Rob, I'll have you hit, yep, you're on top of it. So the reason we're having these conversations is to say, what role do we all play in this risk conversation that we started last time? We threw around ERM and we talked through how do we strengthen our risk assessment, not only as internal audit, but embedding the ideas that the audit committee has. So how do we put together a system in which we can best leverage everyone's skill sets? So I think it's key for us to acknowledge here what role we all play. So ultimately, the biggest thing that I think as an internal auditor, I find I'm reiterating is that ultimately the controls and the processes are management owned and management led. And then we come in as internal auditors to provide an assessment of how effective those are performing. And then ultimately the governance, which is you all as well as our Board of Education, help guide both internal audit as in terms of a measurement stake, as well as administration in terms of implementation to ensure that we are all working together to achieve that goal that we all jointly share. And so the final slide here is more practical in nature. So Tim, you asked a great question. What is the deliverable? So I would say in terms of this conversation specifically, our deliverable are going to be meaningful conversations at the next audit committee meetings between now and the end of the fiscal year. And so while we spend a lot of time at our meetings talking through our projects and things of that nature, I think our maturity level as an audit committee is that we want to further involve our members in the audit and planning process. So as we think through, here's some projected ideas that we have. The way I looked at this is I backed out of the June deadline of presenting the plan and said, you know, I know we begin as an audit group doing our risk assessment in April. So what conversations do we need to have between us between now and April to be best prepared for that final risk assessment? And so this is the proposition and the part where I'm going to ask you all for feedback as to what you think is, well suited. But my proposition is that we, between now and December, as audit committee members, think through some areas of risk or areas that you might want internal audit to look at, as well as areas as you sit down to think, well, I wish I had more information. I would tell you an area if I knew X. So if you could bring both those suggestions as well as the request for information to the December meeting, we could start to work through preparing answers to the requested information and bringing that to the February meeting, and then further having conversations around the risk assessment. So I'll turn it over to you all for some feedback and see if this is an agreeable plan. Obviously, these conversations can adapt as we progress, and that's why I wanted to bring in Guidehouse to provide that kind of third-party perspective as we talk about leveraging the committee and improving our risk assessment.
I appreciate the involving us in the process, and I do think that from an outside perspective, we'll be able to add some value. But I think the the real risk assessment that I would want to see is the input from the superintendent's leadership team. They are the ones who are going to know the organization and know, based on different levels or different types of risks, whether they be financial, safety, reputational, where are those biggest areas that they see the risks in. We can add feedback and perspective, but I've always seen these done first from the operational leader's perspective back to a finance or audit organization.
Yeah, I think that's helpful feedback. And I know that the action item from our last audit committee meeting was to do some research on a management perspective around obtaining consultation for the ERM. And I think that is a critical component and one that we can do our conversations with Ms. Wagner about. Because ultimately, when we looked at that Venn diagram of overlap, ERM typically, like you said, is owned by management. So I think that could be a critical key area for them and role for them to play as we think through this.
I think we were specifically concerned about wages being properly computed. The last meeting, we were worried about payroll, and that is our largest expense. So I know that came up at a prior meeting. Any other questions for Lauren and Jeff on this part of the presentation?
I guess, is there anything needed from this body to help enable that management review of risks?
So Jen and I will touch base and think through from the management perspective how the timeline could look. Because as I think through it from the little roadmap I put forth, we would probably need, if we were to incorporate ERM into our considerations for audit planning this year, we would need feedback by that April timeframe. But I don't know, to what degree that would be practical. To what degree that would be practical. So we'll talk through that. But I still, I would be curious, even somewhat aside from the RM conversation, do we feel that this projection of engagement is valuable? I think I'm trying to come up with a response to the ask, but I want to be sure that my response is relevant and actually helpful.
I would just recommend you come with options. Okay.
Okay, that sounds good.
And let us select among the various options, because you're right, we're just not close to the operations here.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing,
come up with legitimate ideas on our own.
That makes sense. So I think what I'm hearing is if we could get the perspective of management, perhaps through a condensed ERM just for the sake of this year's time, as well as some suggestions. And then we had also talked about updating our audit universe. So we can bring in a list of options and perhaps, some preliminary risks that we see, and then start the dialogue maybe with a bit of prompting rather than just, a blank slate.
Also, I have some feedback. In our organization, each department writes up their own SOX audit, what they plan to be audited against, right? And so I would like to see each department provide us what that standard is that we're going to audit against every year, every couple of years, or whatever the case may be, that they provide that, and that's a standard then that they would be held to, and as well as we could add to it. But I think it would be helpful if we got input from the department heads, right? What their processes are and what they will be audited against. So that's just my feedback.
Excellent idea, Carol. Thank you. Anything else, Lauren?
No, I think that's it. Thank you all. We're just kind of trying a new approach this year, so it's flexible and we'll kind of adapt as we go. So tell us what you want and we'll make sure it happens. Thanks.
One more thing. I know we had gotten a lot of information on TIFs. We went through that a while ago, and I don't know if we've revisited that to see how things are going, working with the city as well as, recouping funds and things of that nature, Jennifer, so I'm not sure.
So it's something we can talk to Lauren about, because we don't want to audit ourselves, right? So we would want her partnership with them, but certainly we can do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be a good area also to include in our.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we're gonna, I guess Lauren and Isaac are gonna talk about the ESSER funding advisory project, which I think is very interesting. Lauren, you ready to roll on that?
All right, you're getting a lot of me today. I appreciate you bearing with me. But we do have great information to share, and this is the critical risk of the times. So today we're going to present our advisory project around ESSER, which in other terms is the funding we've received due to the pandemic relief.
Lauren, make sure you speak very clearly because it's hard to hear.
Maybe I'll pull my mask down a bit,
Yes,
if that's
I think
okay.
that would be.
Thank you. So as a reminder, since this is an advisory project, like we just discussed, we will not result in a full report, rather a presentation that we're doing for the first time publicly with you all today. So I'll turn it over to Isaac to get us started with a bit of background information.
Hello, everyone. So this slide is the Esser funding and how it was kind of broken up into 3 phases, Esser 1, 2, and 3. You can see the total awards as well as when they need to be spent through. And I also want to note that the total funds granted is not just given to us. CPS does have to spend the funds and then submit a reimbursement to receive the funds that were spent. So we aren't just given these funds.
So in terms of the scope of this project, we focused on Esser 1 and 2, which was further explained on the first slide. The reason for this selection is those were the funds that were being utilized to date as of September 8th, the start of this project. So the goal of this advisory project was to provide the Treasurer's Office grants team, as well as the Audit Committee, feedback regarding the compliance of the Esser expenditures to their applicable regulations. As we removed the contracts review project to replace it with the payroll projects in their plan this year, we also wanted to utilize this opportunity to test these transactions for CPS procurement process as well. So you'll see a little bit of information about that as we go too.
Back and forth. So this slide is for the population and the sampling that we selected. And this is as of September 8th, 2021. So the first column here is the testing population, is the total expenditures that we selected our samples from. And then in the second column, you can see the expenditures that we selected. And as Lauren mentioned, we utilized the selected expenditures to expand our testing around the procurement process. So the third column, contracts selected, shows the total dollar value of the contracts associated with the selections from column 2. The table also shows the expenditures in terms of transactions. That's the fourth column. That is the population. And then the transactions that we selected were 48 for Esser 1 and 48 for Esser 2. At the end of this presentation, there are some slides that go into a little bit more detail around how the transactions were the 96 transactions that we selected are allocated amongst the transaction type, if you're interested in more detail.
So as Isaac mentioned, we equally allocated our selections among 4 types of transactions. Those 4 are listed there being wages and fringe benefits, purchase services, supplies, and materials. So this table summarizes the results of the Esser funding. So there are 3 attributes that we tested in regards to Esser funding. So the first is the transaction allowable under Esser regulation and compliance rules? Is it within the fund, the period that the fund is available? And then further, if it's an employee-related expense, such as wages or fringe benefits, can we associate that to an individual employee? And so as you can see from the results, all 96 were compliant with the 3 attributes we tested, which was very good news. And so, as I mentioned before, we then just use this as an opportunity to test a little bit further. So we're kind of double dipping on this project. So while we're using Esser transactions, we're testing CPS procurement. So of course, the first 2 categories are related to compensation, so they were not applicable here. So we looked at purchase services and then supplies and materials, so goods and services. What we ended up testing was focused on proper bidding, the proper documentation, and also the receiving aspect. So you can see from the results, we had 3 of the 96 selections with an exception or a compliance issue around receiving. And so essentially for all 3 of those, what occurred is the person who is supposed to receive the control stating we can now pay an invoice because we in fact received the good or service, received on that before the goods were shipped or the services were rendered. So that is a clear indication that we had not yet received those items.
So we did work with the grants team to come up with some recommendations from the testing that we performed. And so I'm going to talk about the first bullet here around the Essa Regulations. While the selections that we tested were fully compliant with Essa Regulations, we did want to provide one item for consideration. For context, the board approved a urgent necessity resolution that allowed the typical bidding process to be skipped due to the immediate need of the purchase. And so with working with the grants team, we kind of came up with and agreed upon that the use of the urgent necessity resolution should be scaled back now that we are living in a new normal, and that there is more time to plan for those purchases. And then we recommended that the grants team require the requisitioners to state the reasoning for utilizing the urgent necessity resolution, just to ensure that they are not avoiding the bidding process just to their own will. So that's the first bullet.
And then in terms of the procurement testing we did, the first is kind of a given. Obviously, there needs to be some additional training and resources allocated towards the importance and accuracy of our receiving. Also, although we did not note issues in our testing, it's a good opportunity for us to state the importance of multiple contracts with the same vendor need to be combined. So that way that total dollar threshold triggers the right procurement and bidding process, whether it be multiple quotes or a full RFP process. That is a priority of our purchasing department, but given this opportunity to speak publicly about this, we wanted to further emphasize that the importance. And then finally, this is a item that kind of connects the 2 topics. So we recommend, and actually came to this realization through conversations with the grants team, the importance that all purchases need to comply with the CPS method of procurement, because then we have the ability to possibly reclassify purchases that initially were paid for under the general fund. And if they actually are deemed appropriate later as an Esser classification, they can be paid through the Fund 507. So that's an opportunity for us to reallocate funds from our general fund to Esser funding to get the most out of that funding source. And so we did include a slide if Treasurer Wagner had any comments to add to our conversation today.
Thank you. And my comment is that we're in complete agreement with the recommendations. Lauren and Isaac have been great partners in helping us get better at what we do. I suspected the receiving issue is kind of past practice, and we're going to reiterate the importance of making sure that we comply. We don't just receive as soon as the contract is issued. Kind of a time savings. But we're butting up against the difference between decentralized financial transaction processing out in the schools, centralized management. So we're working through those issues. But this will be very helpful.
Are we going to be able to spend all this money, Jen?
Yes.
Okay, so looking ahead, we did just recently get a notice that there are 2 external audits that are just recently becoming underway, which relate to the pandemic funding. And as we kind of move forward, we want to keep in mind that the regulations around Esser 3 are a bit more restrictive. So we will try to continue some oversight with the grants team to continue the compliance with the funding as we kind of head into Esser 3. I believe that is it. Any questions? Can we expect when, I'm assuming the 2 of 3 federal awards selected for single audit will be under the Plattenberg audit, is that right? Can we expect the population they pick to be similar to the population that was selected for you, or are we going to have a larger sample size selected?
Kevin, have we gotten the sample size selections for those yet? Not yet.
Or they tend to pull their sample. But those are actually going straight to the grants department, those requests.
I'm just thinking about using this as a risk mitigation and for the external audits. Obviously, it's great that we 48 out of 48 complied for the Esser stuff, but we want to make sure that that is commensurate throughout the rest of the transactions. And I think we kind of used the sample selection that we used to provide the timely feedback before these audits kind of came about. So I think that was, again, part of our reasoning around.
I would like to add that our grants department staff are much stricter than even our ODE guidance is. And in fact, when we meet with the ODE guide, their counterparts at ODE that are supervising these grants, they've complimented us on how well and documented and persevered in following the rules, more so than any other district they've worked with. So there's been a couple of times where the grants department have told me, no, this is not appropriate. And I talked to the ODE people, they're like, well, yes, it is. And so I just want to reassure you that our grants department is this, and they're very strict about the appropriated expenditure. And so I'm very confident that the audit will come out with flying colors.
I had a question about the cash impact of the program and being reimbursed after expenses. How has the district been managing through that? I know in the spring it was a bigger concern.
DE's gotten better at their reimbursement. They were several months behind, and while it did cause issues with some of the smaller districts who aren't as cash wealthy as we are, we were able to manage that. And so we are being reimbursed within 30 days of our spend now, which is important, particularly around the $207 million. That's the Esser 3 is spread over a 3-year spending plan. which we worked with the board very diligently on how we were going to spend it and how we were going to manage the cliff with those things coming back into the general fund. And so we're monitoring that every month.
Any other questions on the ESSER funding project from the audit members of the audit committee? Okay, Lauren, you're on again. Audit status report.
Thank you. And I appreciate, hopefully you can hear me clearly. I have to balance clearly speaking and speaking quickly. So the final item with me today is our audit status report. I will not read the report to you all, but the two items I would like to call out are, I think Tim alluded to them as we started our conversation today. They relate to board committee requests from internal audit. So I'd like to start by saying we are greatly appreciative as an audit group to be considered in committees beyond audit committee. We see that we're starting to make an impact and communicate with our board members across various groups, which is great. So it is on the bottom of page 3. Wonderful. So the first request came to us in September from our board budget, finance, and growth committee. There is a subcommittee called the Preschool Workforce Development Council. This was born through the partnership with Preschool Promise, and the PWDC requested assistance from the finance committee in interpreting their charter. So the board members on our finance committee asked internal audit to take a look at this. And so we have decided, or are proposing rather, a limited scope advisory project in partnership with members of management from general counsel, the treasurer's office, and early childhood. So where we stand right now is that we have jointly combined a request list for documentation that we will send over to the Preschool Workforce Development Committee, asking them to show us how they have to date fulfilled each aspect of their charter. And then based on the information they provide, the joint group of general counsel, treasurer's office, and early childhood, as well as internal audit, will make some conclusions and recommendations to the finance committee as to perhaps the clarity, the understanding, and the execution of their charter. So this will be rather limited in scope in terms of the impact to our hours available. We did set aside some contingency hours so we can cover this in our yearly plan. Any questions or feedback? You will see some associated memos that have been sent. You'll have on page, it says attachment 1, it should be page 6, as well as the following page behind it. You'll see the initial requesting memo as well as our response. And then further, the next request we received was from the Board Policy and Equity Committee during their September meeting. The Policy and Equity Committee asked internal audit to assist in the review of the 4 board policies that are listed before you. So as a next step, they asked internal audit to report back to the committee at their next meeting, which is actually tomorrow morning, with a proposed plan of how we would go about reviewing, and the word they used was auditing these 4 policies. And so having thought through how we're approaching the work with the Preschool Workforce Development Committee, we thought a similar approach would be appropriate for this project as well. So if you scroll to the last page of your document, you'll see a memo that we plan to draft and communicate to the policy committee tomorrow with our proposed limited scope advisory project. So what you'll see is, as you scroll down under proposed, I think it's the next page, Rob, I'm sorry. One more. So you'll see here, there's 2 lists of questions. Yep, that's it up there. So essentially, we are going to propose a very similar situation. We'll take the critical aspects of each policy and ask management, what written procedures do they have to support the board policy? And if so, do they adequately support each aspect of the policy? And then further, is there evidence showing the procedures have been in fact implemented? And then if so, are there procedures in the evidence showing that we're getting the intended results? And so I think my interpretation of the request from the board is that they would like a pulse of how far has management implemented these policies to date. So based on the documentation that the management group and the process owner can provide, we can make a reasonable assumption to the extent to which they have taken action for each of the 4 board policies. So that is what we plan to propose to management tomorrow, with the hope that we can then conclude and communicate results to both the Policy and Equity Committee as well as the Audit Committee. So any questions regarding?
I think that's an excellent approach, Lauren.
Thank you.
We can't audit if we don't know what we're auditing. And they need to provide us some guidance on what we're supposed to be auditing. I think hopefully they'll find that to be acceptable. So did the audit committee members read what we've been asked to do on this? We're supposed to audit equity and excellence in education, anti-racism, parent and family engagement in federal programs, and purchasing of goods and services. And I think we're already auditing the purchasing of goods and services. That's well within our skill set. The other three areas, we need some guidance. Clearly, I mean, this is something new for our audit committee. So I think your response is perfect, Lauren, in my opinion. Does anybody else have any comments on it?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. I'm excited that the board and management is seeing value in your department and reaching out for requests. And I think, making sure that we're doing what our policies say we're doing is important. I still feel, though, that we're probably ignoring big risk areas in the district. And is this really the best use of your department's time? And I struggle to answer that because I don't think we've done the proper, and by we, I mean really the district's management has done the proper risk assessment to say, this is the area that I think, could cause the biggest financial, reputational, safety risk to our community. So I think you're very balanced in the approach on how you're taking this and measured in terms of it's going to be stepped and not taking on too much, but I'm a little weary about us and your department getting into this type of work.
So I guess, Lauren, you need to come back with us with what they present to you and what type of policies you're going to be asked to audit.
Absolutely. So my hope from this is, quite frankly, to create a request of management to provide the information that I believe the Policy and Equity Committee would like to see. Not as much, I would say this is a review at best. I would not call this an audit at this stage, since we need to gather information. And my hope is just giving the board policy committee a pulse on how far they've gone is sufficient. And then hopefully, if this is something that they would like to be long-term work, we can integrate that into the risk assessment planning process for feedback from the audit committee if this will be a larger scale project. I agree and I hear you.
Anybody have any comments? Any comments on this? Any more comments? It's also politically charged too. Okay. Jennifer, any more questions for Lauren on any of this? Okay, Jennifer Wagner, can you provide us with a financial update? There we are, okay.
Sorry, thank you. Okay, so our strategic plan calls for a revision of the way we do budgeting, and that it's an equitable distribution. So we've been working really hard on changing the way we think and allocate our financial resources. Go ahead, next slide. So typically, we start in the October timeframe, and we have to have an Appropriations Resolution, which is the legal way of the board adopting a budget, by the end of June. We haven't been able to do that for the last 2 years for a variety of reasons. One was COVID. We had no idea what kind of instructional plan we were going to be following. And last year, it was the state budget and the figuring out the Esser funds that delayed us. So as soon as we finished that cycle, we started the next cycle in September. And we have December is shaded because that's when we're going to give the schools their staffing levels. And then we'll definitely have our budget approved by June, barring any other COVID pandemic closing. But there are multiple avenues to build a consolidated budget. Okay, next slide. And so these are the pillars where we're calling, these are the things that we need to make sure that we are investing in. So we start off talking about fixed costs. What are the things that don't fluctuate with enrollment, like our debt payments and our audit fees, building maintenance. And then we have a list of strategic initiatives. So the current year is the third year of our strategic plan. And then we had kind of an extension, and we call that New Shore, if you guys remember that from last year. There's also another plan that's been submitted to ODE. It's called Ed Steps. It's really kind of a merging of those two things and how to address learning loss. And we've identified how we're going to measure our progress. We're calling that the vital few measures. And so those will be unveiled in a public meeting soon. But you recall that we spent a lot of time to identify what our cliff was going to be on the Esser funds and how much money needed to come back each year so that it doesn't all come back in the same year and kill us. So there's about $8.7 million are going to come back to the general fund for fiscal year 23, and we're working on that now. And then the blue pillar is how we're redesigning the way we're allocating. And so instead of just saying, here's our student projections, here are these formulas, now schools, you go figure out how you build your budgets. We've come up with this multi-tiered system of support, which has really been born out of the academic side of the house on how to support a student, but we want to align our funding resources in the same way. So they start off with tier 1, which is the base service that every student will get, a teacher, a textbook, a computer. Tier 2 represents, that's on the next slide. So let's just say we're working through these tiers, and we're identifying tiers by student and by employee. And we're also trying to figure out the new state funding formula. We still don't have reports from ODE yet. And then we have items that we're calling their new. So they weren't in the strategic plan and they weren't in our New Shore, but there are new things that are coming up, like the risk assessment that the audit committee recommended. Standing up a process. We have to invest in the development of a new strategic plan so we know how to go forward. And we're in the process of doing a superintendent search, and we're getting a lot of community feedback that we plan to use to help build that strategic plan. Next slide. So here's the tiers. I got a little bit ahead of myself. So in tier 1, it's the base service for every student. And tier 2 is smaller groups of students. For example, we have a career tech classroom, and they need some special software or special tool to deal with that career cluster, then only those students will get that. And then tier 3 is very highly individualized. So students with disabilities, if they need assistive technology, if it's English language learners, they need an interpreter. And those are some examples of the different tiers. And we're having some very interesting conversations about, like, for example, is transportation a tier 1 or is it tier 2? Because it should be offered to every student, but not every student is eligible. And so we're trying to define what our tiers are. We have team leads on each one of those committees. And then we came up with tier 0 is our district fixed stuff. So we need to make sure that'll get funded. But the district fixed and the base service to all students should come out of the general operating fund. Some of those funds will help support some of the categorical students, the disabilities, English language learner, gifted, economically disadvantaged. But our state and federal funds are supposed to supplement on top of what the general fund spends to support the individual needs of those either groups of students or individual students. So we're having a lot of fun with this. Go ahead, next slide. So the school-related timelines, we've finished the student projections. They were sent out to schools today for feedback. Sometimes they know about something that's happening in their community that might change our projection. We'll get feedback from them by Monday. Next Wednesday, we'll be publicly presenting student projections to the board. Once that's adopted, we will then feed it into our tiers at our staffing formulas. And we are committed to giving the schools their staffing by the end of November so they can give us feedback before they leave for the holidays. So that's way earlier than we typically do it. So. And then we're going to deal with the non-personnel stuff after the holidays. Next slide. Now for central office, every department head is working through those budget pillars, and they're filling out a document that we call PGSMs because we acronym everything. It stands for priorities, goals, strategies, and measures. And they have to tie each one of their initiatives to one of the strategic plan and the vital few. and estimate what that costs so we can figure out what our strategic costs are going to be. Because if we do nothing new, our budget's going to go up by $16 million based on just step increases that are in the collective bargaining agreement. So you survive the year, you get to step up to the next salary schedule, and then the negotiated cost of living increase. So we have to find, in order to stay flat, we have to find savings and other things that we're doing. And so we're trying to do that through this process. Next slide. So these are the presentation or the activities that the performance leadership team is the superintendent and her direct reports and me as a partner. Worked on student projections. We went through all of our staffing formulas and looked at whether there was a new change that needed because of the collective bargaining agreement or the new national standards and things that we had to modify for COVID. For example, in the past, we gave every school an operational para, so the paraprofessional. So the elementary schools could use that paraprofessional to help with bus duty or lunch duty. They weren't actually tied to a classroom. We modified that formula to help with health and safety, so helping with masking and making sure kids are 6 feet apart. We're going through all the budget initiatives, and we're determining what our measure and our return on investment is going to be. And then one of the next steps we're going to do is go through every single vendor contract, as we did 2 years ago, and determine whether, number one, does it still make sense to outsource it? Two, how are we going to determine whether that we're getting the bang for our buck and whether it aligns to what we're calling our vital few, which is like graduation and the third grade reading scores, high level measures. Next slide. So 2 things, we actually adopted a new budget software tool. OpenGov was built for governmental agencies, so it was really difficult because we don't budget the way government agencies do. So we did an RFP, we had a ton of people involved, school field people as well as central office, and picked a software called AlloView, and it was actually built by K-12 people for K-12 education. And so we're rolling that out. It's very user-friendly, and it helps us to do our allocations by full-time equivalent, so it's staffing-based. It also allows us to track the investment we have on strategic initiatives, so we can tie specific budget line items to a strategic initiative and figure out how much are we spending on the third grade guarantee, how much are we spending on American Sign Language as a new class or African American Studies. And so those were some of our strategic initiatives that came to mind. So I'm really excited about this software. And next. So this is my attempt to help the Finance Committee understand the cycle of the build of a strategic plan in the midst of hiring a new superintendent and how it fits. We need to get it accomplished before we get too far along the line of the fiscal year 24 budget build so that we don't miss a year of funding to do strategic initiatives. And so we're going to make it happen. I think that's the last slide. So if you have any questions about our budget process.
Jen, I have a question.
Yes.
To spend all this ESSR money, did we have to hire a bunch of new people?
To spend it?
Yes.
It's helping to avoid layoffs, which is one. It helped us expand our nursing services, so it's a contract on employees, but we now have nursing services in every school. The difficulty is they have a lot of vacancies, so that we don't actually have a body in every school at this point. So we're not hiring a bunch of new people based on that, but it's helping us to fund things that we need to move forward because of this new world that we're living in. That's why we call it New Shore.
So what's going to happen when the ESSR money dries up?
Well, that's the cliff plan, and so we've started phasing that back. So the first year, 8.7 is going to come back. The second year, probably about the same. The third year will be the biggest return. But we've identified things that we just won't spend money on anymore because we won't be in that pandemic thing and we won't have that need as it spends. We try to put one-time things in that grant so that we're not faced with bringing 300 people back into the general fund. Does that make sense?
So we're looking at layoffs at some point.
Minimally. I think there's only like one position that might get laid off.
I mean, I don't understand. You've had a big influx of cash, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the primary use of that cash, I would think, is compensation.
Nope.
I mean, a big chunk of it went to summer programming.
Summer
and
programming.
continues to go to that in the future, nursing staff.
So there's a
that could
lot of
be-
it is going to facility enhancements. Okay.
Okay, so that's a long-term, okay.
Yeah, a lot of it is going to returning to transportation service back to where it was pre-COVID. So when during the COVID year, we were only transporting maybe 2 days a week. So we used, in order for us to return back to full service, $7 million a year is being paid out of that. So that's a contract. There are some decisions we're going to have to make. For example, pre-COVID, we had $2.4 million worth of nursing services, and now we're up to 7.4. And so the question that we have to come up with is what, after COVID and money goes away, what service are we willing to invest in? And then how are we going to pay for that?
So you're spending it all. You're not building up cash in anticipation of the ESSR funding drying up.
No, we have to operate school in a safe manner, and that's what we need to do.
So some hard decisions are going to need to be made, I guess, in 2023 maybe.
Well, we're making them as we go. That's why we did a 3-year plan, and we had the board adopt the CLIF plan in August. That's why it took, we were delayed in adopting our budget this year, because we wanted to make sure we were all on the same page about the 3-year plan and how we're going to do it. Now, it can be modified as things change, because things are changing every other day with, vaccine mandates and mask mandates, and who knows what's going to happen in 60 days. So we're flexible and adaptable, but we do have a plan, and we are following that plan.
And maybe, are you hiring people saying that you might not be able to, in a few years, you might not have this job? Or
We have one position that we hired on as a safety administrator, and he knows it's a short-term job because it's safety related to COVID work. And if that money goes away and the issues go away, then we won't need that role anymore.
okay.
Most of the other positions that are being funded, there's so much attrition that it won't be like with our safety paraprofessionals. We have so many vacancies that anybody that's out of that grant will just fill in a vacancy in a different area in the budget.
So we have open positions at Cincinnati Public Schools.
We have a lot of vacancies. Everybody's fighting. They're doing all incentives to try to hire. I mean, we have the same problem that everybody does, trying to get people to come work.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Jen? Christine?
It could be helpful for us after the board adopts the enrollment projections to see that. I know obviously that's a big financial impact to the district, and I'm curious because I know it's pretty sporadic, by school as to what the enrollment impact is and then what we think it will be going into next year.
Yeah. Most of the decline in enrollment came from kindergarten and preschoolers. Young families wanted to keep the kids at home. And so we are seeing a rebound, but that's still the area. We actually grew in our high school grades during COVID. So yes, we will certainly present our projections and how that impacts our budget.
Mr. Chair, if I could, to follow up on that, I think it's very essential for the audit committee to see our enrollment projections and also the reality of the last few years. As we've talked about in finance, building capacity versus enrollment, under enrollment, as we're trying to think in terms of growing the district. So I really would think it would be beneficial and helpful to the board and the district if we had your perspectives on that enrollment effort. I think that would be very helpful.
There's a team working on that specific request, and so as soon as it goes public, we'll share it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and to keep in mind the enrollment and then the square footage issue of our buildings, and where there's been demographic changes. I mean, half of the kids, when we did the FMP, the Facilities Master Plan, Avondale is just one neighborhood has at least 50% fewer children in it than it did when we did the FMP. So there are lots of things that need to be kind of looked at. And I do think it'll be essential, not only the enrollment next time that we meet, but I'm sure that the audit committee will want to have a deeper understanding of the metro issue. And perhaps the yellow bus as well. So I would appreciate if that can be added to a developing agenda.
Got that, Lauren? So where's our enrollment today? Where are
35.4, is that correct?
We're under 36.
It's under 36. We were at 36.3 pre-COVID. We dropped down to 30. I forget. I can't remember the exact numbers, but because I don't deal with this data every day anymore. Jeremy's our new. I don't know if you've met him. He's our CIO, and he's now doing the enrollment projections this year. So we're helping.
Okay, we have about 6 minutes left. Eve, do you want to update us? Anything that's going on? Or
Well, I'll just say that you have written monthly financial reports. We can talk about them, or you can just read them financially. The only odd thing is because of the new state funding formula, they're doing direct funding. I remember when we had $80 million of tuition that they would give to us and then would take it away for the charter and voucher schools. They go directly to the schools now. So our revenues dropped because of that, but so did our expenses. And so it looks odd when you do a year-to-year comparison, but we're right on target where we expect it to be. So if you have any questions, you want to look at it in writing, send me an email, we can follow up. In the interest of time, we'll just go with that.
I'll only take 2 minutes if that, but Kevin did present some highlights, the finance, unless you shared those. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Just the highlights.
3 or 4 line update. When we were looking at September, our cash balances are up over this time last year. And as Jen mentioned, when you look at the revenue slide, which I think is the next one, you can see there is a slight slope downward. But the key thing that we did want to focus on there is that we are on track. As Jen mentioned, 60 to 80 million is that difference between what we would have received and then just moved on to the charter schools or for the scholarship programs that were through the foundation. Expenditures, a couple slides back, or that way, correct. Expenses are down. Again, the biggest part of that is that tuition expense change. We are seeing salaries and benefits being up as part of the collective bargaining changes as well. And then we have a slide about school-wide pool, which again, the biggest change there is salary and benefit increases as well. And then the last couple slides talk about the tuition assistance with the preschool program. There are at the end of September, about 770 of the students who receive some sort of tuition assistance. Their adjusted enrollment at the end of September was 1,713, so that's all students regardless of funding source. And just to compare that 770 this year, we were at 564 the prior year. I think that hits the highlights. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
Enrollment's at 35.5 today.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Eve, do you have anything you want to tell us about?
Yes, we had our search group in here for a couple of weeks. As I reported before, there's a group out of Chicago, the Alma Advisory Group. We're very excited about them. They have a wonderful network. After a number of community meetings and focus groups, many of which were very low attended, in part because there might have been late notice or what have you. We've decided that we need to reach out a little bit more to at least 3 or 4 specific communities, so to speak. And so we had planned to release the established community board profile for the next superintendent on the 3rd, but it's looking more like we will have a special meeting on November 8th to reveal it to the community. But the Alma group will probably post the vacancy as we had previously scheduled on November 4th, because it's just the vacancy, it's not the profile, so to speak. And after that, then through November, they will be doing the recruiting and narrowing it down so that by the time we're into late November and very early December, the thought is that there might be 10 or 6 semifinalists, so to speak, that will then be interviewed. And then we'll be coming here to meet the community and get community input for that. The hope is to try to have a vote on a new superintendent sometime late December, because the current board members would like to participate in the voting, but by that time we will know who the new members will be, and they too will be a part of the executive session discussions and community briefing and debriefing and the full discussion. So that way the new board members and the current board members that would still be around will be doing that kind of bridge and transition. And the hope is to be able to know who that person might be and announced before the end of December. They may or may not be able to assume the job at that time. Very unlikely that they could, but at least we would know who that person in whose transition can take place. And interim would be doing that effort until the end of the year. So that's where we are, and we're very pleased with the ALMA group and very pleased about this rather accelerated schedule and hopefully unifying the community around both the new and the old board in order to have a successful superintendent.
Okay, thank you very much, Eve. Audit committee members, thank you for attending. The only person who didn't come was Jim Crossett. Our next meeting is December 14th.
Hey, Tim, I've been here. I've been at the meeting online, the whole meeting. Sorry, I didn't come.
Apologize, Jim. Okay, I apologize. Okay, I apologize, Jim.
I apologize for not coming in person. I'll do better next time.
Okay. If anyone has recommendations for the audit committee, please let Lauren know. We do have an opening. And if no one has any other questions, then any questions? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.